Got an unusual one as far as the circumstances go. Very nice guy, lives up in Nashville, contacted me to ask if I would finish up his 66 Bandmaster, by which I mean he did the majority of the work. A couple of chassis solder joints need to be made. He didn't have the iron for that. He wants me to finish that up and check for DC or any little gotchas and install some speakers in the cab. And this is normally the kind of thing I'd say not just no, but hell no to. Some guy bringing me where he stopped to finish up, because it's usually better for me to just do the whole thing. I don't have to spend time correcting a bunch of stuff. But he seems a very nice guy, and I saw a lot of pictures of this amp before it arrived, so I think this is going to be just fine. And, Nashville, Memphis, almost local. So he just dropped this off, and he's going to the Stax Museum and going to go get some barbecue while I get to work. So let's do that. Now, he said this is a 66, and it very well may be. I've not looked on the inside yet, but the iron is all from 65, so that's to the good. It's not uncommon for an amp that was shipped in 66 to have 65 iron. Let's see what's under the doghouse. Now, I've already seen photos of this, but it's always good to look with my eyes. So I will say in all modesty that Ian follows my channel and has used my videos as guides for how to do this. So F&T caps, the Vichy 2-watt metal film resistors, the leads with just enough slack, and I know that they're going underneath the board. Everything looks great. Good job, Ian. While I have it on this side, I will check one thing, which is all too common and easy to overlook. I want to make sure that the transformer mounting hardware is tight. All right, see, that one is free spinning. And that's very common because these are just sheet metal screws going into sheet metal, and the gravity, the weight of the transformer over the years can cause issues. So that one I will need to drill out and put a stainless steel machine screw with a nut on the other side, and make sure the output sockets are tight. Well, I'm sure that in all the correspondence he said 66, but everything in this amp points to 65, from the chassis date stamp to the iron, so that's good. So here is the AC safety ground. It needs a chassis connection. I'll make it right about there. And I could see in the photos that this chassis ground is not the best. I'm going to redo that without affecting the date stamp. Everything in the amp has been done the same way I do in my videos, which is very flattering. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow and the channel stays up and people emulate what I do, and it's not that my way is the only way. It's not that my way is necessarily the best way. It's not about ego, but this is one of the higher standards of work that's possible to do on these. And so it'd be nice for me if in the future I know that people are doing at least this level of work. So that's nice. Okay, new chassis ground made there for the AC safety cable, and the green wire, the ground wire, is longer than the hot and negative. It's coiled up, so it's not the big blob of wire, but it is longer when extended. And that solder joint was redone because the old wire was just resting on top of the solder joint. Now it's embedded much more deeply. That's a critical ground. That's from the reservoir cap. That's the noisiest potential ground in the amp. You definitely want that to be good. Ian already correctly ran the neutral to one side of the receptacle, with the other primary from the power transformer going to that neutral connection, and the hot then goes to the correct inner connection of the fuse holder to the power switch, power to the other primary, So everything here looks good. The next thing I always like to check on these, I want to make sure that the output sockets are tight and the input jacks are tight. I imagine that they will be because this guy has taken great care in everything he's done, but again, I like to make sure. And if I find anything really loose, it means I need to triple check all the pots. So it's harder. See, these aren't all the way tight. So let's take all the knobs off. I'm not going to show all of them because the process will be the same, but here's something that bothers me. When these are all the way counterclockwise, they're not on the same, the one should line up on each one of them when they're all the way left. So when I put, when I put these back on, they'll all be aligned exactly the same, which will translate to the 10s being the same. See that wear on the front panel? That's one of the reasons I use a spacer when I put these back on, so that that wear stops happening. And these all feel pretty good so far. I'm going to check the input jacks. But usually if an amp has loose output jacks, I just need to see, all right, the volume for the normal channel was loose. So I'm glad I checked all this, even if you're not seeing it on camera. All right, all that, and the only one that was loose was the volume pot for the normal channel, and I can tell by this brass shaft and bushing that this is a replacement pot. Let's loosen this pot up. All right, as I was saying, the currently available J-taper CTS have longer bushings, which means longer shaft than the other CTS pots, or the originals. So you really want to use more than 2 lock washers. Now the reason I pulled this out was not just to add a lock washer, but because this used this black oxide, and then this little flat washer, which is not necessary. All right, these black oxide washers, this is what ships with this pot if you get it from CTS. These things are useless. They don't make a good ground connection. And in this style pot, with the wiring like it is, that is our connection to ground. So we get rid of that black oxide. I'm going to see if 2 or 3 of these zinc are needed to get the bushing this and shaft to set on the other side the way it is on the others, so that knob's not farther out than the others. It extends out about the same. It's 0.5 millimeter shorter now. When the knob's in place, that won't matter. So let me put this nut back on. The next thing I always check on any fenders from this era are these wires going from the main board to the brass control strip. These are from the cathodes on the board to the brass for ground, and sometimes they pull out. None of them have, but this one doesn't look as good as the others. So the first thing I want to do is hit that with some alcohol to get any layer of dirt or yuck off the top of it. So with the chassis iron, let it sit there and get everything hot. All right, now that wire moved, you saw that. I was expecting that. These wires are under tension, they want to move. So that's where it wants to be. Now I heat everything else up again and just keep that in place while it cools. So now let's take a look at the preamp stuff and see what all is going on here. All right, the lead dress looks great. You replace the cathode bypass caps. The only one I have an issue with, and it's not his fault because you have to have done this a long time, he's got a 25 microfarad here, where the schematic says to use a 25 microfarad. That's the second part of that's the Roach side of the tremolo circuit. Fender actually changed from 25 to 5 microfarad at some point in production, though it was not reflected on the schematic. And the difference it makes is how quickly the change tracks when you change the speed. If you turn the speed pot too fast, there's a lag with this, whereas with the 5 microfarad, there's not. But this guy is in town, like I said, and he's running, he's going to Stacks and grab some barbecue. There's a time limit here. He's certainly capable of ordering and installing a 5 microfarad or 4.7 microfarad cap here if he wishes. That's not what I'm here to do today. I'm to do the stuff that he either didn't have the equipment to do, like the chassis grounds, or just that little bit of extra knowledge. I'm physically looking, inspecting very closely all the solder joints on the tube sockets, see if any of them have pulled out or are in danger of pulling out. That can happen. I see one on V3. All right, got it focused, and I have the exposure crank so you can see it, otherwise be in shadow. It doesn't look as bad to the camera as it does to the eye, but some of the solder joints here at V3 can be better. So let me pause the camera, move it out of the way where my hands need to be. I'm just going to reflow these a little bit and trim that grid connection excess length off. I just like to know it's all as good as possible. All right, that looks better to me. A little stray bit floating around inside. Let's get rid of that. Let me show you one other thing to always look at in these. All right, any of the horizontally mounted resistors on these boards can pull up as the board flexes. But the one that does it the most, because it's the longest span, is also probably the most critical one in here, and it's this cathode resistor. It's hard to talk about resistors in a long-tailed pair, so this is actually the cathode resistor, and this is called the tail resistor. And if this amp did not have negative feedback, this would be ground. But this amp has negative feedback, a la the other 763s and similar reverb and non-reverb fenders from this era. And this is where the negative feedback ties in. So they have elevated this whole network from the cathode and the tail and the negative feedback resistor above actual ground, which is here. In this case, like any amp that has 6 L6s, it's 100 ohms away. In the amps with 6 V6s and a long-tailed pair, which is the deluxe, it would be 47 ohms. And the Princeton uses a cathodine phase inverter, so other than being aware of any horizontally mounted components, it doesn't apply. So I want to see what this 100 ohm resistor measures. 87.6. So this amp is going to have a bit more negative feedback than it should, and it's about 10% lower than it should be, about 13%. I think that is just enough out of spec that this amp would not be its best. So I'm going to change that for a 100 ohm resistor. If this is original, I will return it with the amp. But there's a trick to installing these, and I'll show that because it's very common for these to pull out. So let me get this old one out real fast. I've got a new old stock 100 ohm that actually measures 108 ohms. So sorry about that. Actually goes a little bit more in the other direction. The other one was under spec. This one's a little bit over spec. This will actually be a nicer sound. Now, two things. This is new old stock. So these leads have been exposed to air for how many decades? So I'm going to take a little bit of alcohol. You can also do this with naphtha or acetone if you're very careful not to get any on the body of the resistor. I just want to wipe the leads to get a tarnish off. So the right side is now shinier than the left side. I'll do that to both sides. You don't have to do this with a new resistor, but if you get new old stocks, if you get a package of old Allen and Bradleys off eBay, first measure that they're actually anywhere near what the bands say. You don't want to put a whole bunch of 100K resistors in an amp that actually measure anywhere from 200 to 300 or up. Second of all, before you use them, clean the leads. Doesn't have to be perfect. The heat of the iron and the flux will do even more cleaning. But just get the worst off with a quick wipe with some alcohol and a paper towel. Now, I could just bend it here and here and put it in here. You know, technically you want the tolerance band to go to the right on a fender. That's how they did it. But if you do that, you run the risk of the new one pulling out over time as the board continues to flex. So one of the nice tricks you can do is kind of make gentle bends a little bit past where you want it to be. And then grab a small-ish diameter screwdriver. Just want to make a loop. I'm not sure how well I can show this on here. Just want to loop it around. That means the new one, when it sits on there, will actually kind of have these shock absorbers. So if the board moves side to side, the resistor leads won't pull out. They'll just have a little bit of built-in slack. All right, as far as I know now, there's only one thing left to do before we put tubes in and check voltages and biases and all that fun stuff. So let me show you that. Two things, actually. First is to make sure all these caps nuts holding the power transformer are tight. This one was not. This is the reason the post 66 amps with their transformer mounted grounds are not trustworthy. Over time, the weight of the power transformer slightly deforms the chassis, and even a Kep's nut comes loose. All right, I've removed the two sheet metal screws, and they are with the death cap and the 100 ohm resistor that I removed. And you can see the chassis here has buckled. Maybe it's another depth thing. You can't really see it to the lens, but it's very apparent to the eye. Now, in the past, when these screws have worn out, I've tried to put in the next size up, which would be a number 10. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't, but then you get really big things on the other side, and what happens when the number 10 fails. So what I like to do on these, because Leo would have approved this because it just makes the whole thing solid, is I take a 9/64 bit. Well, to argue with myself, I noticed that the flanges on either side of the output transformer were slightly cupped. And I just thought that was just a very narrow place to spread the force on that very small amount of the metal. So instead of using the number 6, I'm going to use the number 8 stainless hardware. And I'm going to enlarge that hole just a little bit more to take the number 8 screw. All right, so I've got an 8 by 32 half-inch screw, stainless steel. I've got a stainless steel compression lock washer, then a regular stainless steel washer, and then a stainless steel nylock nut. That will give me a very secure, reliable connection. All right, tight on both sides. Much more surface area of the screw and washer contacting this little flange, this little tab, which means more of the flange is contacting the chassis, and that thing is rock solid. That movement was the entire bench moving, not the chassis. All right, the next thing to do is put tubes in this thing, power it up, and see what the voltages are like.